Well, it's been an interesting little bit, but I finally made it back. Sorry for not updating. My phone wouldn't work in the ceiling, and I'm honestly not sure how long I was there. Sometimes when I think about it, it seems like weeks. Sometimes it seems like it was only a few hours. Despite all that, it always seems like a long, dark dream that I woke up from before it was over. You know, that kind of hazy, half-remembered way you remember things sometimes. Anyway, you don't care about that. You want to know what happened up there. So Buddy and I went into the ceiling to try to find Gale. I had something of his from before we had separated, and a quick sniff sent Buddy on his way. He was eager to go. I don't know whether he had done this sort of thing before or not. Maybe it was the dreams we had been sharing. He was as desperate to find Gale as I was. It was exactly like my dreams, the whole place like a photo negative that just went on forever. Probably doesn't do it justice, but it was like a whole other Dollar General store up there. It was and wasn't like the other stores I'd been to. It was stocked with weird monochrome copies of things, but the shelves went on and on forever. It was this odd black and white liminal space that extended into oblivion, and it was even stranger than the outside. Buddy was on the trail from the moment we touched down. I was expecting that he would take on the same characteristics as the place, but he was a distinct contrast. He was a big black and white collie, I suppose, with a little brown mixed in for good measure. He stood out against the backdrop like Easter grass in a Halloween diorama. I suppose I must have as well, and I crouched a little as I went along. I didn't want to be seen by the miasma that made this place their home, and the deeper we went, the more I could feel their presence. It was like smog. It seemed to waft around like a lingering presence. It hung in the air, smelling acrid, and it was a different color than the other dark neons. You wouldn't have thought there could be so many shades of black, but the presence left behind by the miasma was velvety and slightly thicker than the flat black of the store. The closest I can come to explaining it is the puppet shows they would put on at the library when I was small. They would put felt on the background. The felt stood out a little more, and it was something like that. I know most of this probably isn't making sense to you guys, but the photo negative space isn't a spot that makes a whole lot of sense in the first place. The outside had plants, wildlife, and an ecosystem. This place reminded me of a graphic novel drawn in pencil. Everything was hyper-realistic. Everything was very detailed, but it ultimately looked flat, like your hand would bump into it if you reached out to touch it. Buddy didn't seem to notice any of this, as he walked with his head down and his tail wagging, following the trail that only he could see. It was here that I began to think we might not be as alone as we thought we were. We rounded a corner, Buddy still moving, following his trail, when I nearly ran into someone. They were like this place, black and white copies of someone I'd never met, but they were moving around the aisle and reaching for things on the shelf. It was an old woman dressed in a shawl and the floral print dress of someone who does a lot of shopping secondhand, and she was utterly ambivalent of me. I reached towards her, wanting to see if she was solid, but as my hand bumped against her, she shuddered and looked around as if someone had called her name. Buddy barked then, jumping a little as if telling me to hurry, and I was forced to move on as he led me deeper into the infinite store. We encountered others as we went, men and women, even a few children who were moving up and down the rows of products. Some of them looked scared. Others seemed to be thinking this was a temporary thing like I had. But all of them were the same flat black and white of the store. How many Dollar Generals were there in the loop? How many people were stuck here, just trying to survive as they figured this place out. I had only seen Gale, the Hermit, and Celine since I arrived, but it was possible that there could be any number of others here, just trying to find their way out. Buddy ignored all of them, moving towards his intended target with laser precision. We didn't meet our first miasma for a little while, but the first one nearly ended our trip. We'd been moving between aisles, Buddy enjoying his unhampered run, when he suddenly came up short. Some of his exuberance left him as I moved up beside him, and I saw what had gotten his fur up. Lumbering between the aisles, its head far up where the ceiling should be, was a miasma. It wasn't as large as the ones I'd seen in the outside, but it was bigger than either Buddy or I. It didn't seem to see us, making its way ponderously along, and as it disappeared down another shadowy row, I decided it might be time to use the leash. I couldn't lose Buddy in here. Celine would never let me forget it, and though he didn't want to be on a leash, he seemed to understand the need. I don't know how long we traveled, but it felt the same way that traveling the stores did. You could travel the stores as slowly or as quickly as you wanted, but you never quite knew how much time had passed. Traveling the ceiling didn't make me feel tired, didn't make me feel hungry, and aside from needing to stop for a few minutes after a particularly long run, I didn't get winded either. Felt like I could go for days, but I knew that there had to be an end to it somewhere. Buddy and I knew where we were going. When we came to a small park in the middle of the Infinite Store, I knew we'd found the spot. It was beautiful, a park made of crystalline trees that stretched towards the sunless ceiling as they reached for whatever lay up there. Buddy went sniffing up the path, marking one of the trees before moving up the path towards the next. I wasn't sure what he was looking for, but I had a hunch that it had something to do with Gale. In my dreams, he had been floating off the ground. Maybe these crystals were keeping him aloft. It wouldn't be the oddest thing I'd ever seen in here, and the more I looked at them, the more they made me think of a conversation I'd had with a friend once. It was a conversation that seemed to have taken place 1,000,000 years ago now, but I could still remember the light reflecting through the facets of the gem when I held it up to the light. Her name was Candace, and I'd be lying if I said I wasn't trying to sleep with her. She was into witchy stuff, crystals and tarot cards and things, and she'd been explaining how she could store energy in crystals. She always sat hers out in the sun to recharge, but she claimed that other people could put energy into them too, and you could pull it out later. Human beings are just big batteries at the end of the day, and their energy is unique. These didn't look a lot like her crystals, but I supposed crystals were crystals at the end of the day. The way they reached towards the sky made me think about the infinite store that existed around them and wonder what kind of energy they were drawing in. Could this be some sort of battery for the store? Maybe it was one of many. Maybe it was just one more odd thing amongst a sea of odd things. My barometer was a little unreliable these days, and looking at them made me realize how numb I had become to all of this. There was a time when I would have stared in awe at these things, but now they were just one more attraction on my road trip of strange. If I did get out, how would I return to the world I had known after something like this? I guess I'd have to escape to figure that out. Buddy must have found what he was looking for, because he suddenly jumped up onto one of the crystal trees and started barking frantically. His barks were deep, but confused, as he butted his head against the surface hard enough to worry me that he might hurt himself. I tried to pull him off, but he came back to the spot right away. I squinted at it, thinking there might be something inside, and when I leaned in close, I saw what appeared to be half of a person floating in there. Half may not be the right description, but it's the best I can do. There was a right arm, a left leg, some of a torso, and a whole head. It wore glasses, the face bristling with gray hair as it smiled warmly into the distance. It appeared to be dreaming, the face twitching now and again, and in its hand was a clutched red leash. It all floated within the crystal, and I wondered if this was the man that had written the message on the bulletin board that I had first seen in Gale's store. Border collie named Buddy, black and white with some brown, blue bandana around neck, very sweet, good service dog. Would love to see him again. "Come on, Buddy," I said, the dog still jumping against the crystal. "I'm not sure there's anything we can do for him. Gale might still be salvageable, though, if we hurry." Buddy whined as he looked back at the crystal, and before my eyes, I saw the hand holding the leash began to disintegrate. It was like something slowly being dissolved, and when it was gone, the flesh floated in the depths of the black rock. I thought Buddy was going to stick for a moment, and I would have to drag him a little, but then he gave the crystal a single lick and headed off on Gale's trail again. As we moved amongst them, I wondered if all these crystals contained people. There were so many here. Too many to inspect if we wanted to save Gale, and the deeper we went, the smaller they became. The crystals at the start had been huge, towering nearly to the ceiling, but the ones near the back were more like young spruces and pines. They had a few limbs on them, and when Buddy barked and put on a burst of speed, I saw the first of the seedlings. Seedlings was a nice way of saying people who were slowly being overtaken by rock. One of them was too far gone, his body mostly encased, and another had only an arm and a leg hanging out of the rock. They didn't move or acknowledge us, but I could see fingers of one of them twitching as we came near. They were definitely alive in there, and I shuddered to think that something like that could happen to me. On the ground, amidst a small collection of rocks, was Gale. He was lying on the ground, but the crystals had lifted him slightly as they grew. He was in the same pose I had seen him in my dreams, and his left calf and right arm were the only thing covered in crystal. I called his name, leaning down to open one of his eyes, and as the eyeball rolled to find me, I knew he was still alive. His lips trembled like he was trying to say something, and as I set to work freeing him, I told him to hold on and that we would talk once he was loose. I hadn't been sure what to expect, but luckily I had thought to bring a hammer and a saw. The hammer made quick work of the half-formed crystal, sending jagged bits flying in all directions, and as his arm came free, I started on his leg. Buddy was standing by, cocking his head as he made a worried, keening sound. When Gale finally came free, I got under his arm and found only dead weight in response. Gale was in no shape to move himself, and after some deliberation, I left the backpack behind and pulled him up onto my back. I was a little bigger than Gale, thankfully, but he was solid, and I wasn't sure how long I was going to be able to carry him like this. I took hold of Buddy's leash and told him to take us home, but that's when we got caught. We had no sooner started moving than everything went dark. Pitch black would be a better word for it, but all the light in the area suddenly went out, and we were left in total darkness. Buddy was still pulling at my hand, his nose not blind, and I put a hand out in front of us as I moved without sight through the crystal garden. I had to be careful. Any one of those branches could have stabbed me through with a jagged length of rock, but it was the darkness that scared me more than anything. The darkness always meant miasmas were about, and though I couldn't see them, I was pretty certain they could see me. We came briskly to the shelves, me bumping my shin against one as we came out of the garden, and that was when I heard the scream of the beast. It was answered by another, and another, and suddenly the ground shook with their passage. They were looking for me, looking for their prize that I had stolen, and as I followed my four-legged guide, I kept my hand out and a firm grip on my passenger. Buddy came up short a second before we heard a loud boom, and I felt the air rush past as something fell in front of us. Buddy barked in fright, and when he pulled me forward, something passed over my head, catching on the hat that I was wearing and taking it with it. I was never sure how close I came to getting my head swiped off by a miasma, but it had to be pretty damn close. We kept moving, Buddy taking us down one corridor after another, and the sound of loud footsteps was constantly behind us. When we stopped for a minute, two of them passing on the aisle behind us, I heard someone grunt and felt movement as Gale squirmed a little. "What's going on?" he rasped. "I can't see anything." I breathed a sigh of relief and put him shakily onto his feet. He had been getting pretty heavy. "It's me. I came to rescue you, but the lights went out after I got you out. We gotta be quiet. They're looking for us." He made a sound somewhere between a chuckle and a sigh. "Just my luck." As the thunderous footsteps passed, I grabbed his hand and told Buddy to lead us on. We daisy-chained our way through the aisles as we avoided the loudest of the footsteps, and after a while the lights came on, as suddenly as they had gone out. We were standing in the middle of a home decor section, and it was a mishmash of wall signs and those little shelves people use for knickknacks. Buddy seemed a little lost, running in circles as he tried to find whatever he was looking for, and I had time to take a real look at Gale. He wasn't looking great. His skin was pale and his muscles were slack as he stood sagging beside me. He looked like he hadn't slept in days or eaten a good meal, and he was utterly drained from whatever the crystals had been doing to him. I hope you know the way, 'cause your dog looks a little lost." I looked at Buddy, but was far from reassured. He was scratching at the floor and hopping around excitedly. I started to get nervous. We had to get back. Gale needed a couple of meals and about a week of sleep. Until we got out of the ceiling, we weren't likely to get either. I tried to get Buddy back on track, but he just kept barking and scratching at the floor. I bent down to try to calm him a little, and that's when I saw it. There was light peeking up through the little slits in the floor. It wasn't the weird track of lights here either, but a harsher, more real light. It was coming from the floor, and when I poked a finger through it, I looked down into a familiar burnt-out store. It was near the front, where the ceiling tiles were broken up, and I rubbed Buddy's head as I realized what he was trying to tell us. "Good dog," I whispered into his fur. "Very good dog." When I looked up from the petting, though, I saw that we had found the hole just in time. 50 feet down the aisle, looking at us as if not able to believe what it was seeing, was a huge miasma. It had taken 3 big steps, eating up the ground, and I scooped up Buddy and told Gale to follow me. I jumped on the opening and grimaced as I landed badly on my ankle when I hit the tiles. I was back in the Dollar General beyond, and as Gale landed heavily beside me, I helped him up and we made a run for the bathroom. The miasma had jumped, missing us as it lunged by seconds later, and as it tried to slide out of the ceiling and into the store, we were already booking it for the exit. I pushed the door open, grabbing Gale's hand as I thought about Celine's safe house. Buddy was whining against my shoulder, Gale staggering a little as we passed through, and we all fell in a heap inside the well-lit safety of Celine's home store. We laughed as she came running over, realizing that we had made it, We had been in the ceiling and lived, and I'd come back with Buddy and Gale. Gale's resting now. He ate enough food for 5 people and then promptly passed out. He hasn't said much about his time up there, but I'm sure he will. He was exhausted, and I watched him start to fall asleep into his dinner a few times as he ate. I gave him my pallet for the night, started building another one when Celine came over. She had the hermit's journal in her hand and looked a little unsure how to start. "I owe you an apology, kid." I told her it was fine, but she shook her head. "No, really. I told you that there was no end to this place, belittled you for thinking that there was, but I was wrong." She opened to the part of the journal where he talked about the snowy store that came before the midnight store with all the miasmas in it. I've been here before. It was near where I found Buddy, and I remember stopping at that door like it was a physical barrier. I never went through it, but it sounds like Jasper did. Whatever is beyond that store is likely our ticket out of here, and I think it's where we should go to check. I nodded, but when Gale's voice quavered up from behind us, I felt a cold chill run through me. "I've seen it too, that place. It's where you rescued me from. It's where the miasma store the power source for this place. The people they take into the ceiling are being used to power the Dollar General beyond." Hey everybody, I know you've been curious about what happened since we came back from the ceiling. Well, we've been planning our escape. The first day was for sharing information. We sat around the Coleman stove as we ate and listened to Gale's story, hoping there would be something in there that we could use to help us escape. We had both been to the other side, but Gale had been there for quite a while. His insight would likely be instrumental in an escape attempt from the Dollar General beyond. And anyway, it was time for sharing of knowledge all around. Celine seemed almost bashful around him, not really sure what to say. She was glad to have him with her, that much was clear, and glad to have me and Buddy back too, but she didn't seem to be sure of what to say to him now that he was back. They hadn't seen each other in what I assume was a very long time, and though they looked exactly the same, they had likely existed for decades apart. As Gale sat, the soup in his lap forgotten about, he told us all about the ceiling. "I know you've seen it, kid, but it's like an endless black and white store. It's the store, I think. The stores we travel to are just their shapes from there. The black and white store can be whatever you want it to be, and by existing in them, we subconsciously create the stores." "But wait," I said, not understanding. You've been to the stores that I've seen. You told me as much, and I saw your mark on them." Gale shrugged. "I don't know. Maybe you just aren't very creative." There was silence for a moment, then he laughed, breaking the tension. "More than likely, it's because I've existed here for about 100 times longer than you, kid. Even so, you've written down more than a few stores that I've never been to until you took me to them. I think the longer you travel to stores, the more you influence them. I don't really know, of course. I'm mostly just guessing. But I do know that the stores are taking more people than we thought." He took a sip of his soup then, but it seemed like it was more to wet the pipes than to fill his belly. While you were up there, did you run into any of the black and white people?" I nodded. "Yeah, to me, they looked like photo negatives, but I guess I could see them being black and white." Gale nodded. "To me, they reminded me of the old Tex Avery cartoons I used to watch, especially the ones that played towards the end of the lineup, the ink and paint sketches, the ones that looked kind of unfinished. That's what these places looked like to me, like unfinished ink tests from some production company. They moved strangely, back and forth like angry ghosts, and When I first encountered them, I thought they might be part of the miasma's defenses. Once I got to the crystal cocoons, though, I knew what they were. Those are the ghosts of the people that have been used to power the beyond. We thought we were alone, but they're just saving us for a rainy day. These stores are just their pantry, the maze they keep the rats in until they need more food for the snake. How many of the ghosts did you see while you were there? He asked suddenly. I thought about it. 2, maybe 3. I saw about 30 while I explored, and most of them were children. He let that sink in for a moment as he took another sip of his soup. It was chicken noodle, something name brand tonight, but it had turned to ashes in my mouth. Suddenly, I knew what had probably happened to Jasper's missing grandson, what had happened to Rudy and Margot, and what had befallen so many other nameless kiddos who had gone to the bathroom and wound up somewhere else. You called them cocoons, I said. To me, they looked like trees. Gale nodded. They did to me too at first, but once I realized what they were, I couldn't think of them as anything but cocoons. They hold them there after the miasmas get them. They hold them there and they drain their life away. I say they take mostly kids, but I don't think they're very picky. They want life force, and they take it where they can get it. Then, Celine began, looking up from her soup as if unsure she wanted to continue. Why don't we break those cocoons? We could smash them up and mess them up for the miasmas or whatever they are. Gale had started shaking his head when she started talking about busting them up, and it only got more pronounced the longer she went on. Nah, Celine, if we did that, we'd be trapped here just like them. They'd have us cornered then, and it'd be all too easy to just use us as a power source till we were used up. No, best chance is to just escape and never set foot in one of these stores again. It's the only way to be truly safe. Once we escape, if we escape, we never go near one again. No worries there, Celine said. I think I've seen enough Dollar Generals to do me for a lifetime. Yeah, I added, and Buddy barked as if in confirmation. After Gale finished with his story, I laid out everything I had seen outside. I told them about how the miasma had been there, too. I told him about the mushroom forest and the brackish water. I told him about the strange creatures I'd seen there and how I had found the remains of Kenneth. I told him about the hermit's journal and about the rain that had hurt me. Then finally, how I'd come to be back inside the Dollar General beyond, and how I'd found Celine. They both listened, though Celine had heard it all before, and Gale just laughed as I wrapped it up. Into the ceiling and into the outside. You've just broken all the rules, haven't you, kid? I shrugged. I guess so. Celine then told us everything she knew about the journal and about her experiences with Jasper, the hermit. When I met him, he was barely hanging in there. I got him some meds. There's a store that's basically just a pharmacy, and for a while it helped him. He told me about a place after the snowy store, a place where the darkness hid something. He said there's a lot of shadowy creatures there, the miasma, and that he believed it was an important place. He thought they guarded it because there was something special there, but he was too afraid to go and see what it was. I think that's our way out. The miasma are there, but maybe if we're sneaky, we can find out what they're guarding and see if it'll help us. Gale nodded. Agreed. I think I'm more than ready to be out of this place. It's been a long time since I saw trees and grass and something other than these goddamn shelves. Well then, Celine said, we're in luck, because I might have an idea on how to fight the miasma. Gail and I stared at her like she was crazy. Even Buddy looked a little skeptical. This would have been valuable information to someone going into the ceiling, I said, a little perturbed. The place where the miasma live. Celine shrugged, looking a little sheepish. Yeah, well, it didn't seem like the time to test it. And believe it or not, I haven't really encountered a lot of miasma in my time here. I've taken steps to avoid them, actually. But while reading Jasper's journal, I remembered something that he had given me while he was in a semi-lucid state. He wasn't writing very clearly by then, and the pills didn't seem to be doing a lot for his dementia, but one day when I came to visit, he presented me with a sheet of paper and said it was a first-hand account of how to fight one of the shadow creatures, the ones that lived in the ceiling. I put it away, thinking it was nonsense, but I looked over it again while you were gone, and I think he might have something. The logic is sound, at least seems to be, and I suppose if we're going to take the fight to them, then it'd be nice to have a little surprise for them. Quit stalling, Gail said. Humor and intrigue at odds with each other. Let's hear it. Well, he claimed that any light source could disrupt them, but only the point that the light was touching. He speculated that this was why the lights always go out when they come in. It's easier for them to move in low light or total darkness, which makes them more substantial. He had a diagram here too, though it looks like a bunch of flashlights taped together. He's pretty clear that it won't kill the miasma, just make them less substantial. If it isn't solid, then it can't hurt you. At least, that's what he thought. We were both nodding, but I was still a little miffed that she hadn't shared this with me before I went into the ceiling. Tested or not, I could have used that upstairs. Yeah, she said a little exasperatedly, but imagine if it didn't work. You're counting on this Hail Mary, and it doesn't work. I don't want to give you false hope. Hell, I'm still not sure it'll work. I'm with Gail. Our best bet is to sneak into this place and hope to be missed. The miasma here are supposed to be absolutely massive. Maybe they'll miss us if we can move quietly and find the doorway or portal or whatever it is that takes us back to our world. This just, I don't know, gives us options or possibilities. Something that might give us an edge. I nodded. Her logic made sense. It was definitely something I might have tried after being cornered by one of those miasma, and if it hadn't worked, it would have drawn a lot of attention to Gail and I. We would have likely not survived if they'd seen us, and not knowing had probably stopped us from doing something desperate. Buddy stuck his head under my hand then, taking away a little of my irritation as I petted him. Okay, so we need to have a look around, it seems like. If we get the lay of the land, then we can make a plan. Get there without being seen. Gail nodded. That seems like a solid plan. We can figure out what's in there and form a plan of attack. I'd really like to test that theory about the lights, too. I think I know the perfect place for a test. Celine looked lost, but I nodded as I realized what he was talking about. The burned-out store. Gail wanted to use the burned-out store to test a hypothesis. A hypothesis that had the potential to go very badly. We don't have to, Celine said, but Gail cut her off. No. If it can help, then I'd like to know how much. If we're going to get out of here, then we might need every trick in the book to manage it. That was when we began preparing to test Jasper's theory. Gail has a bunch of those big old 750 count candle lights that he's been setting aside. Something to light the place if the power goes out. And Celine has a bunch of those halogen lanterns that she's hoping will do the trick. I've been playing around with these super bright clip-on lights, the kind that joggers use, and hopefully we can make little fields around ourselves that disrupt the shadows. We worked furiously, though I guess we didn't need to. It wouldn't matter how fast or slow we worked. We were still stuck in this timeless void. As we worked, I couldn't help but notice little things about my companions either. They were working close together, smiling and laughing more than I'd seen before. Makes me wonder if Rudy and Margot were the only secret, not-so-secret couple at the Dollar General. I've been trying to give them space, Buddy and I taking a lot of walks on back alleys, and I've become pretty close with the pooch. I wonder if Celine would mind him coming back with me. Would that even work? How does the return process work? So many questions, but not many answers. So that's where we are now. I'm making this update while those two take inventory of what we have in our hideout. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't a little excited. It's a chance to escape, the best chance we've had so far. And if it fails, then, well, I guess at least it'll fail spectacularly. They're putting something together now, working on something that will help us combat the miasma, and I should probably go help them. Hopefully, there won't be many of these left to go, and I'll be back in the real world soon enough. Till then, pray for me. I'd like to say that today I got the closest I've ever been to a miasma, but for you guys who have been reading this for a while, you know I've been way closer. I was nervous as I saw the thing come sliding out of the ceiling, looking around as if confused by the lack of prey. We were all hiding in the back room. Gail, Celine, Buddy, and I, and just watching as it stomped around and looked for us. "Get ready," Gail whispered, hitting a button and tossing the collection of lights and duct tape. Gail had rigged them all together somehow, and they glared out at the miasma as it roared and turned to try to find the source of its discomfort. We were all strapped with reflectors and little blinking bike lights, including Buddy, who clicked and jounced with all the lights he wore. We were hoping it would protect us from the creature, but there was only one way to find out and test the theory. When it turned to look for us, we all charged, brandishing our lights and hoping for the best. We had planned to run if it appeared to be going badly, and when the thing turned and took a swipe at Gail, I prepared to flee. We could always go get him again if it decided to snatch him, but it appeared that our luck was on the upswing. When the miasma reached for him, his hand slipped right through him, and I saw Gail shudder as it passed harmlessly out of the older man again. The miasma seemed as confused as we were, but it couldn't seem to find a hold on any of us, not even Buddy. "Okay, time for the real test," Gail said, turning off his light as he grabbed a blanket off the floor. Pulling it around himself, he blotted out the lights that were attached to him and stood by as we waited for the coming swipe. The miasma lunged at him, grabbing him with shadowy fingers as it prepared to slip back into the ceiling. "Do it!" Gail yelled, sounding the least bit concerned now that the time had come. Celine and I swiveled the beams of our lights, and suddenly Gail dropped to his feet. The hand that had gripped him lost purchase, the fingers losing density, and Gail was free once more. We laughed and danced around, shining our flashlights and shaking our blinkers. We had done it. We had won a real victory over this boogeyman who had haunted all of us in different ways, and it felt good to show the monster in our closet that we were no longer afraid of it. Then the miasma loosed a loud roar that shook the rafters and quenched some of that excitement. Suddenly, there was a lot of weird movement from the darkness overhead. The ceiling was mostly gone up there, and the shadows were moving like an old man trying to catch his breath. There would be no rescue attempt if one or more of the miasmas came out to get us, and I grabbed a hold of Buddy's harness as we made our escape. They had started taking shape as we stepped into the bathroom, and we were all glad when we stepped out into the fluorescent lights of Celine's safe house. "Excellent," Celine said. "Now we know that we can fight them." "If," Gail said ominously, "it works wherever we're going. Celine gave him a stony look, huffing loudly. I can't think of any reason why it wouldn't. Must you always be so gloomy? Gale gave her a look, but I thought it might have been more sad than angry. You haven't been to the ceiling. Things work differently there. If this end of the line is anything like that, then we could be in for some real trouble. Then let's get going, Celine said. We tested Jasper's theory and it worked. Let's go see what we're dealing with, now that we have a weapon. Gale opened his mouth to say something, but closed it again when he realized that there was nothing to say. Celine was right. We could escape right now, so why were we hesitating? I wondered if maybe it was a hesitancy to throw ourselves in without thought, but if we could be back in the real world, then why not jump? The worst that could happen is that if we failed, we were no longer sure that that was such a bad thing. The thought of just existing here for the next however many years sounded like hell to me. What would happen if I stepped out like Celine and Gale were preparing to do, to find that over 20 years had passed? What if I stepped out to find that 50 or even 100 years had passed? Could I reintegrate into such a world? I didn't want to find out. We need to be ready when we come there, Gale said. We need to save our tricks until it's absolutely necessary. I've got an idea, he said, walking over to the shelf as he looked for something that only he was aware of. If we cover our lights, then we can move relatively unseen. At least I think we can. Imagine their surprise when we take our covers off and bombard them with the hated light. He tossed a throw blanket at me, giving Celine another, and told me to secure a third one around Buddy. He might need some help when the time comes. You'll need to help him, but it should keep him safe. We might find them looking for us before we get where we're going anyway. If they know that we can fight them, they might try to harvest us before we can escape. He tied his own blanket on like a cloak, looking like some kind of low-budget Lord of the Rings character. Get whatever you're taking with you, and let's get to it then. Do we know where the store is that he's talking about in the journal? I asked, looking at Celine for some clarification. No, she said, but I think I can get us fairly close. I know the store he's talking about before that, the one that has snow in it, and I think if we travel from there, we can find the place he's talking about. That store was as far as I've ever gone, but it should get us going in the right direction. So we packed a few things, food, fresh clothes, some weapons to go along with our lights, and stepped towards the bathroom for what I hoped would be the last time. I had found a harness for Buddy that made me think of the ones worn by service dogs, and I hoped that the handle on it would help me hold him if he got spooked. Celine reached for my free hand, taking Gale's with her other, and before she stepped through, she looked back as if to take in her home away from home one last time. The store had been her sanctuary and her respite for a long time, though she hoped to never see it again. She also looked thankful for the comfort that it had brought her. We gave her the moment she needed, and when she turned back to the door, I could already see the snow building on the other side. We stepped into a winter wonderland, and I smiled as the wet flakes hit my face. Everything there was made of snow, and from the shelves to the products to the workforce, everything was nothing but glistening white. The hermit hadn't been wrong. I could see several androgynous-looking snowmen with red vests that turned to look in our direction. The effect wasn't altogether inviting, and their dead-eyed faces reminded me of a horror movie I had seen when I was a kid, about a creepy-looking snowman that hadn't been terribly friendly. Buddy clearly didn't share my trepidation. I had to hold him by the harness to keep him from running off to play in the snow. We stepped through again, and this time we were in a perfectly normal-looking store, set for St. Patrick's Day. We traveled for a while, going through about 20 stores before stopping to take a break. We found Jasper's underwater store, a store made of concrete, and the store where Celine had filled Jasper's prescription, back when he was still semi-sane. We found a store covered in thick fog, a store that was a pet supermarket, and then we finally came to rest in a store that resembled a park. Buddy facilitated our rest more than any desire to stop, and as he ran and sniffed, we took a seat and talked. "How many more do you think before we get there?" "Who's to say?" Celine said. "Jasper wasn't very clear on how far he traveled before he got there, and really just named stores he saw at random." Gale had his knees up against his chest, and he looked broody. This was abnormal for him, Gale usually being so gregarious, and Celine slid over next to him and put an arm around him as she leaned against him. He smiled, clearly appreciating the closeness, but some of that melancholy persisted. I rolled a diet soda at him and another to Celine, and as it bumped his foot, he smiled and reached down to get it. "What's the first thing you'll do when you get back?" I asked, trying to steer the conversation towards something more upbeat. "I want a nice long bath in a real tub," Celine said. "If I never take another camp shower again in all my life, it'll be too soon. I want to eat food that I don't heat from a can or take out of a package," I said wistfully. "There's a Japanese steakhouse down the road from my apartment, and I feel like I could easily spend the rest of my life savings in there eating sushi and eel and still not get enough." That got a laugh out of both of them, but only until Gale really thought about the question. "I don't know," he said, after a long moment of thought. "You told me you stepped into that bathroom in 2023, he said, turning it into an accusation. "If that's true, it means that 25 years have passed since Celine and I came through the bathroom. When I stepped out of reality, Bill Clinton was in his second term. The internet was still kind of a fad, and the cell phone I had was about the size of my wallet. I've seen that thing you plink around on when you have downtime. By the sound of it, that thing is more powerful than any computer I've ever seen. I still had 5 payments left on my Camry, the one I left sitting in the parking lot. By now, it's probably been towed along with your little Gemini, Celine. My apartment has long since been leased. My bank account and my house likely went to my ex-wife when I was declared dead after being missing for so long. Let's face it, kid, while you might have something to go back to, Celine and I are likely looking at bleak prospects." I wanted to refute this, but I really couldn't find any evidence to the contrary. How did I know that 20 years hadn't passed while I was here too? I could be stepping out into the future as well, like Fry stepping out of his cryotube. The thought of all 3 of us, well, 4 I guess, if I counted Buddy, stepping out into an uncertain future was more than a little scary, but I knew it was the right choice. "What's the alternative then?" I asked Gale seriously. "Stay in here and wait to be scooped up by miasma? Live every day wondering if you're going to wake up being fused into a crystal? I can't live like that, Gale, and I don't think you can either." He started to get angry. You could see it on his face, but he settled as the weight of the statement settled over him. "As to where you'll stay, all of you can stay with me for as long as you need. You'll have to sleep on the floor most likely, but I can guarantee there's less of a chance that a shadow monster will come out of the ceiling and try to get you." Gale laughed, but he looked like he was trying not to cry as well. It was the same old Gale, the one who had rescued me from the miasma and taught me how to navigate the landscape of the Dollar General beyond, that came out in that laugh, and I was glad to see some of the darkness that had surrounded him since I had pulled him out of the ceiling dissipate. "You know, until you came into my life, I always just assumed I'd die in here. Never wanted to believe that escape was an option. How would one escape from a place like this anyway? Now, it almost feels like there might be something out there for an old guy like me." He raised his can in salute, and Celine did the same. "Here's to you, Alphabet Man. No matter what happens, I'm glad I found your message on my bulletin board." We all drank deeply, and as Buddy came back for pets, Gale got back to his feet and brushed the grass off his pants. "Let's get this over with, then," he said, taking Celine's hand and smiling at her. "None of us are getting any younger." We stepped out into the perfectly normal Dollar General store. Perfectly normal, except for the strange language that everything was written in. Gale nodded. "This is it, then. No matter what happens in there. I'm glad I don't have to do this alone." Celine gripped his hand tightly. "I hope your couch is comfy, because I think I could sleep for a week straight." "There's only one way to find out," I said, grinning as we traveled one final time. We all grasped hands tightly and stepped into the dark space that we hoped would take us home. The final beyond. We had truly come to the final beyond. We came out in an unfamiliar monochrome landscape, and I could already hear Gale having a small panic attack. We were back in his nightmare, the place he had nearly been trapped for until he was used up, and when Celine hissed at me to help him, I tried to catch Gale as he went down. Buddy barked a little, confused and unsure of what was happening, but I quieted him down as Celine tried to get Gale moving again. He was mumbling to himself, at odds with what he knew he had to do, and when I yoked him up beside me, I think it surprised him as much as it did me. "You can have a mental breakdown once we get out of here. For now, I need you on your feet. You've lived through too much of this place to let it snatch you at the very end." He shook himself, my words getting through to him, and after a few more reassuring pets to let Buddy know it was okay, we headed into the blank and endless aisles of the final store. This place was just as ghoulish as I remembered it. The shelves seemed to hold the ghosts of old products, and it wasn't long before we encountered the ghost of explorers who'd come before us. Buddy made a whining noise as we skirted them, the hollow after-images troubling him as they went about the last moments of their lives in silent monotony. Celine looked troubled too. This was her first time in the miasma's home, and watching the quiet ghosts as they went about their time seemed to make her anxious. We were reminded that we weren't the only residents of this place a few minutes later, as the rumble of a miasma grated against our ears. It was on the next row over, thankfully, but we pressed ourselves against the shelves like it still might be able to see us through the slab. If it sensed us at all, it gave no sign. It just kept its course and moved down the infinite aisles on whatever work it was about. I was already sweating under my covering, the lights getting a little hot beneath it, and I was hoping this wouldn't take too long. The last thing we wanted to do was catch fire. "I can't believe you came here by yourself," Celine said to Gale. "You either," she added after thinking about it. "I didn't," I said quietly, ruffling Buddy's ears. "I had Buddy with me." He looked up happily, nuzzling my hand. "We better get going," Gale said. "Who knows how many of them there are around here." We went faster then, taking departments at random as we tried to find the exit we all knew had to be here. I think, even then, I suspected it would be in the crystal area, but we couldn't use Buddy to find it this time. I'd been using Gale's scent last time, but Buddy didn't have anything to fix on this time. He was flying as blind as we were, looking around frantically as if expecting to see something that would help us. If he was finding any landmarks, he kept them to himself. It all looked exactly the same to me and Gale, and as we ran, I kept an ear out for the rumbling footsteps of our captors. The miasma always sounded gigantic when they walked. They were pretty huge, I suppose, and it made them easy to hear in the otherworldly quiet of this place. For such a huge place, the silence that surrounded us was almost deafening. Nothing seemed to exist in this place, aside from us and the miasma, and I was very aware of the noise we were making as we beat feet. Given what I've told you, it must sound odd to hear that nothing seemed to exist here, but that's all I can do to describe it. The ghosts made no sound, the store had no ambience, and even the music that was present in many of the others was silent here. The place was so effortlessly oppressive that it made sense for it to act as a cage for those the miasma had captured. This place felt like a tomb more than anything, and I prayed it wouldn't be ours. For all his talk of hurrying, Gale was almost the reason we got caught the first time. We were hustling down an aisle, trying to find some sign that we were getting close, when Gale stopped dead in his tracks. I'd seen the ghost guy, the one holding hands with the woman as they ran, but when Gale stopped and Celine put her hand to her mouth, I knew who we must have found. I had to admit, there was a resemblance between the two of us. No wonder Gale mixed us up so often. He was young, probably in his early 20s, with thick hair and glasses. He was on the heavier side, but not fat. His face was round and boyish, and I imagine he had an infectious smile. I would have to imagine because the look on his face was full of terror. The girl was younger than him, probably 19 or 20, but she looked no less terrified. I like to think that maybe they had tried to make an escape too, the way Gale and I had. But they hadn't quite gotten out. In the end, he had managed to find her, but it had gotten him caught too. "Rudy," Gale said, reaching out and wincing as his hand passed through the kid's face. Rudy was saying something to the girl, Margot, I assumed, and he took no notice of Gale as he stood, stuck in his last moments of freedom. "Gale," Celine said, her own hand resting on his shoulder, "I know it's rough, but we have to go." "How?" Gale asked, his eyes locked on his lost son. "How can I just leave him here? He's my son, Celine. How can I just abandon him?" Celine was crying, but as she tried to comfort him, I could already hear the rumbles getting closer and closer. "You didn't abandon him. He's been gone for a long time. Even if we found him, it wouldn't be him anymore. He's been used up by now." "You don't know that. You can't know that. He could still be here, just trapped in the crystal. We could still save him. We could..." The slow rumbles were building, like thunder on the horizon. "He's gone, Gale. As much as I wish it were otherwise, he's gone. We have to get out of here. We have to get out so we can ensure that no one else gets trapped here and suffers the way he did. If we escape, then we can warn people, but if we stay, we'll be gone too." Buddy whined deep in his throat, and I turned to the two of them as Gale seemed to dither before the image of his precious son. "Guys, one of them's coming. We've got to move, or we're gonna get caught." Gale couldn't seem to pull himself away from the image of his lost son, but as that terrible darkness appeared at the end of the row, I took him by the arm and led him all the way to the end of the aisle as it turned in another direction. Peeking from the other side of the end cap, I could see it looking around, clearly expecting to find something here. Maybe it had heard us, maybe it had sensed us, but either way, we had escaped again. As it moved away, I turned and finally realized something from my previous trip. The older woman in the floral print dress was still hunched where we had left her, and I grinned as I realized I knew where we were. "Come on," I whispered, and the four of us set off. If Gale looked back, I missed it. All I knew was that the four of us were off like a shot. I took corners as I remembered them, Buddy was also moving with an ease that made me hope that he too remembered where we were going. The rumbles never got very close, and as we came to the edge of the crystalline garden, I felt a surge of joy rush through me. If there was an exit, it had to be here. Celine's eyes went from the flinty fear of a hunted animal to the bright sparkle of enchantment. The crystal forest, while mostly sharp angles and strange geometry, was still hauntingly beautiful. It was hard not to look at it as a thing of beauty until you realized its purpose. The ones on the outskirts wouldn't have more than bits floating in them, I assumed at least, but the ones in the middle could have mostly whole people in them. As we walked amongst the giant crystals, I clutched my wooden club a little tighter. The miasma would definitely come if we started smashing them, but how long would that take them? One look at Gale told me he was thinking the same thing, and was barely containing the urge to start swinging. Do we know what we're looking for? Celine asked, keeping her voice low. She seemed afraid to talk too loudly, afraid of what might hear her, and I leaned down a little so I could whisper too. I'm guessing it's something we'll know when we see it. Maybe, Gale said as we trudged. We might have already walked past it and not realized it. I can't imagine it's here for them, or they'd be all over our world. Then why is it here? Even as I asked it, I knew it was significant. It had to be in the DGB for, I don't really know, but its purpose had never really occurred to me. It was like that thing in the backyard my mom used to catch wasps in. You just sort of stopped thinking about it after a while and kept existing. You knew the wasps in there were suffering before they died, but they were just wasps after all. Was that maybe how the miasmas saw us? We were just humans after all. Why not trap us in their version of a jar until they were ready to shake out all the corpses and start again? Hell, they wouldn't even have to do that. They, much like the Native American hunters, used all the parts of their prey. These things were efficient, if it was their doing in the first place. We should spread out a little, I said, as the crystal forest spread out before and behind us. We could cover more ground that way. Sounds like a great way to get snatched, Gale said, cutting me off. We need to stay together. Otherwise, we're just asking to get picked up. If we stay here too long, we might get grabbed. If we split up, we might get grabbed. No matter what we do, there's a chance we're gonna get grabbed. I didn't come this far to get grabbed out of hand. With any luck, we'll get close to whatever the exit is before we get seen. Guys, Celine said, but we cut her off. We've got to be smart about this, Gale. We need to get out of here as soon as possible. We can just stay close to each other, like within 10 or 20 feet, so we can call out or something. Guys, Celine said again, and Gale turned just before he could fire back. We were deep in the grove, strange crystal trees all around us, and the black door that floated a few feet off the ground was hard to miss. It was about 6 feet tall, the surface made of dark wood with a handle of blackened metal. I could see markings on the surface once I got close, and the swirls looked old and kind of angry. The door stood out like a sore thumb amongst the alien plant life, and I felt like it might be a little too obvious. Think this is what we're looking for? I asked, reaching out shakily to touch the surface. Only one way to find out, Gale said, reaching for the knob and twisting. Wait, Celine said. What if it's a... But Gale had committed to the action now, and as the door came open with a harsh grind, a shriek arose from deep inside the monochrome store. It was a noise I had heard before as I lay in the outside and tried to make myself as small as possible. They're coming, I told him, taking my flashlight in my other hand as Celine threw off her cloak. We gotta get out of here. I turned to find Gale struggling with the heavy door, the muscles in his arms standing out as he strained at it. "I can't imagine how that old man got this open by himself. This thing feels like it weighs a ton." I saw the problem as the rust began to flake off the hinges. The door had stood here for God only knew how long, and the hinges had calcified. Whenever it was the hermit had been here, the door had been used very little since. Gale was pushing against it with all his might, but he was having trouble getting any headway. The crystalline trees shuddered under the footsteps of the miasma, and I braced for a fight. "Almost," Gale grunted, heaving with all his might, and I saw he had managed to get it open about a foot. The 3 dark shadows were coming through the crystal forest, and as I threw off my cloak too, I reached down to snatch Buddy's off, and we shone like beacons. I looked up to find a 4th trying to come in on our left, a 5th from our right, and I was sure there would be others trying to come in at our backs. They must have somehow known that the door was opened, and as the beams of our flashlights grated out, I heard Buddy bark as he pulled at his leash. The lead miasma reached out with a pair of hands the size of manhole covers, but when it tried to grab Celine, its hands lost their fullness. They passed harmlessly through her, through me, and Buddy too, and the miasma seemed confused. It lifted its hands and looked at them, not sure why it couldn't grab us. The 5 of them seemed unsure of how to approach us, and when the door creaked open with an almost painful grinding sound, we all turned to find Gale waving us inside. "Come on, before they..." but stopped as something grabbed him from the other side of the portal. It was a hand made of living darkness, a black so dark it made the black of the monochrome look dull. It snatched Gale inside before we could take so much as a step towards it. "Come on," Celine yelled, barreling inside as Buddy and I followed afterward. I stopped long enough to catch the door, not wanting the miasma to follow us somehow, and we stepped into a strange new place. As the door slammed behind us, Celine, Buddy, and I found ourselves in a place we had only read about. It was dark, like a child's room without a nightlight, and the only light seemed to come from the slightly glowing floor tiles. They were the same pattern as the linoleum in the Dollar General stores, and they floated in the air like phantom stepping stones. Everything floated here, as a matter of fact. The shelves, the floor, the weird glowing fungus that grew on everything. It all seemed to float in the void that hung around us. Amidst it all was something else, something different. In the midst of the floating space was a green glowing stone, and it pulsated with unknown power. We looked around, trying to find Gale, and saw him hovering amidst a cloud of deep midnight. The cloud had fixed 2 large eyes on us, smoldering coals the size of meteors, and it wafted towards us with boundless confidence. Gale was struggling, trying to tell us to run, but he was shivering with every labored breath. Whatever the cloud was, it was cold, and that cold was slowly killing our friend. It billowed towards us right up until it hit the lights we held, and then it flinched away with an angry hiss. We reached for Gale as it passed, but he was too far away to grab. Celine called for him, trying to get to the cloud, but I held her back as it swirled and moved about the space. It's clearly guarding that gem, which is probably how we get out of here. If we go towards it, it's likely to come down and try to stop us. When it does, we can get Gale and the gem and get the hell out of here. Celine thought about it for a minute, taking another glance back at Gale before nodding and following behind me. The way wasn't easy, especially not while being menaced by the cloud, but we hopped from one tile to the next as we made our way towards the gym. I wasn't much help, carrying Buddy and still jumping, but Celine had her light out and was on guard for the cloud as we traveled. The cloud, the true form of the miasma, I'm sure, just kept trying to dive bomb us off the tiles, but the lights we wore and our flashlights kept it far enough back that it never really got close enough to do more than buffet us with cold air. We kept an eye on Gale, his shivering letting us know that he was still alive, and as we came within 2 easy steps of the platform, I started making my plans to rescue him. "Grab the gem," I shouted, and as Celine made a break for the last 2 squares, I watched the cloud. It made a beeline for her, swarming like a fog bank of angry birds, and as it got close, I made a break. Buddy made a nervous sound by my side, seeming to understand the importance but not liking the jostling, and as the cloud passed over the platform, Celine rushed for the emerald. I jumped and passed into the cloud. It was like plunging into a cold shower, and for a moment I just floated inside that chilly abyss. When I bumped into something solid, however, I locked my free hand around it and carried it with me as I fell out the other side. Gale and I both gasped as we landed in a heap on the platform, and I could see the cloud retreating into the murk. Too many lights, I supposed, and I ripped off Gale's covering as I added his lights to ours. Celine helped us up, Buddy shaking off imaginary water as we got our bearings. I had eyes only for the gem, however. It was right there, sitting 5 feet away, pulsating dully on its pedestal. It was our ticket home. I could feel it. "What now?" asked Celine, her hand already inching towards it as she tried to keep that hand at her waist. "Well," I said without much assuredness, "if it's anything like the door inside the stores, we can use it to travel out of here together. We just have to be touching." "Do you think destination is important?" Celine asked, readjusting as she hefted Gale. He was shivering and coughing, the cloud really having done a number on him, and Celine had thrown an arm around him as she tried to keep him on his feet. "I don't know," I said. "I don't think I could picture the store I came in from. Could you?" She shook her head. I lifted Buddy into my arms, my other hand reaching for Celine's as we stepped forward. I took some of Gale's weight onto myself, the two of us looking like friends carrying a drunk home, and it freed up one of her hands for the gem. The arm under Gale grabbed her shirt as well, putting us in contact as we prepared to hopefully travel one final time. "See you on the other side," I said, her hand stretching to grab the crystal. "I hope so." As her fingers came into contact with the surface, everything went dark. For a little bit, I didn't know anything. I was blind, mute, deaf, senseless, adrift, just waiting to land. Felt like hours. Felt like seconds. Then slowly I became aware of something. It was wet and rough and scraping against my face as a worried whine accompanied it. I opened my eyes and saw Gale and Celine lying on the floor of a generic bathroom that could have belonged to any big box store in the country. The lights were on. Buddy had set them off when he got up, and as I sat up, I could already hear a low growl from my 2 companions. Buddy was dancing around happily, barking with excitement, and I rubbed my head as I tried to shush him. Despite the pounding headache, we had made it. We were somewhere different, somewhere new. "Where are we?" Gale gravelled out, rubbing his head as the 2 of them blinked owlishly at me. I looked at the bathroom door, hesitated for a moment, and then I pushed it open. I couldn't help but laugh as the signage for the new location came into view. It's the farthest place from Dollar General, and also usually the closest." Gale looked out the door, and after a few seconds, he began to laugh. We walked out onto the floor of the very closed Family Dollar and found ourselves stepping back into our world at 11:17 on December 4th, 2023. I'd been gone for less than 6 months, Gale and Celine for a little less than 25 years, but we were home at last. When the blue and whites started pulling up a few minutes later, I realized our adventure wasn't over yet. Now, we had some explaining to do. So I guess this is kind of a follow-up, but it also answers a few questions I know you've all had. First off, yeah, we got arrested. Well, no, not really arrested. But the police were not pleased to find us in the Family Dollar. I guess we triggered a silent alarm when we came out of the bathroom, and the response time for this side of town was pretty stellar. We submitted, because what else were we going to do? We had been through the ringer, and we were in no mood to fight the cops. They cuffed us, patted us down, and took us to the police station. Buddy got to ride in the empty canine unit cage, his dog having been left at the kennel for the night. They put Gail and I in the back of the same car, and as we rode, Gail seemed to be telling me to keep quiet with the looks he gave me. Fortunately for all of us, we left everything in the beyond when we had traveled the last time. We didn't have the backpack of incriminating items that we couldn't explain. We didn't have the homemade weapons or the flashlights, and we had come through with nothing but the things we'd gone into the bathroom with initially. This worked out for us because it meant that I still had my wallet, my phone, and my punch card from work, the one from the night that I had worked. I assumed Gail had some sort of wallet on him, men his age usually did, and hopefully Celine had some kind of ID on her as well. I had noticed that both had emerged in their uniforms, and I wondered what the police would make of a pair of Dollar General employees being in the Family Dollar after hours. We were all loaded into little rooms and left to wait for about 15 minutes. That's when a guy in a sheriff's department uniform came in with a cup of coffee. I didn't know how you took it, so I put some cream and sugar in and added a piece of ice so it wouldn't be too hot. I thanked him, the coffee going down a treat, but the real surprise was how much I enjoyed the sound of an unfamiliar voice. I had spent what felt like years listening to the same three people, and one had been little more than incoherent babbling. I'd miss new people, even just the overheard side conversations you picked up on while you were out and about. It was like music to my ears. So, I don't know if you're aware, but your family declared you missing about 6 months ago when your boss said you'd missed 3 days of work in a row. They found your car in the parking lot of a Dollar General, but it was closed for the night. They searched around the store, the surrounding neighborhoods, and finally, even inside the store, but no one found so much as a hint of what had happened to you. Now, you show up with 2 other missing people who have been missing a hell of a lot longer than you, in the bathroom of a Family Dollar that sits across the street from the store we found your car in front of. He looked over the top of the file folder at me, clearly hoping I would connect some of the pieces for him. So my main question is how? I waited for him to elaborate, but when he didn't, I just shrugged. How what? How did you manage to reappear after 6 months in a store that had been locked up for the night, in a bathroom that had been checked out and signed off on by the manager before he locked said door and armed the security system? I've got him in the sergeant's office, and he's telling us how he was the last one out of that store, and there was no way that he missed 3 grown people and a dog in a bathroom built for 1 person. So either you guys just dropped out of the sky, or... But at that point, someone new pushed their way into the room. Someone in a suit, with a smile off a crest box. I'll take it from here, officer. There's been a mistake. Someone is waiting for you in the sergeant's office. Someone who can explain everything. The deputy looked at the man skeptically. And just who the hell are you? My name is Mr. Washington. I work for a special interest group. Someone with information on what's going on. This man is to be turned over to my custody immediately. It's all in the paperwork you'll find with your sergeant, I assure you. The deputy looked like he intended to argue, but his radio chirped about that time, and his supervisor told him to come to the office to sign some paperwork. "Sir, I've got a suspect in room..." "Doesn't matter. Mr. Washington is going to take over from here. Now I need you to come and sign some forms. ASAP, deputy." The deputy licked his lips, clearly not comfortable with the situation, but he got up and headed for the sergeant's office. Not before one last word on the matter that clearly didn't impress Mr. Washington. "Don't move till I get back. I want to make sure this paperwork is on the level before I just let you walk out of here with a potential suspect." Mr. Washington smiled, but it never reached his eyes. "Of course, we'll be right here." The deputy left then, but he never came back to make good on his threat. Mr. Washington watched the door for a count of 5 before turning back and gracing me with one of those smiles. "You have been to the beyond, haven't you?" I started to tell him I didn't know what he was talking about, but when he reached up and pulled out the wire to the closed-circuit camera, I got a little scared. Anything could happen without the cameras watching. "I hear it's nice this time of year. Always such a nice place to visit, though you likely wouldn't want to live there." I watched him move about the room, his movements precise and contemplative, like a predator stalking prey. Have you been there?" He smiled wistfully, but whatever he was thinking of didn't seem to strike him as completely happy. "Not for many, many years. Congratulations on escaping, by the way. You're one of about 8 humans to escape the beyond in the whole time it's been in operation. The number was significantly smaller until tonight, though we aren't counting your furry friend towards that number." I watched him as he paced around, realizing it reminded me of something I'd seen recently. A little too recently. Are you one of those numbers?" He smiled then, his eyes sparkling like the reflection of a tar pit. "Oh no, kid. I'm a native." His smile was likely meant to be disarming, but I could see the barely contained want behind his form. Had he created this form himself? Was it something that had been given to him when he poured from that dark place I had only recently escaped from? How did something like him adjust to being in a body so small? "So, how long did you spend there?" he asked, still pacing, ever patrolling. 6 months, according to the police at least." "Not quite as long as your friends in the other room, though still impressive. You know, most of our guests are taken within a month. Generally, when they run out of food, my people come to take them before they starve. Then they reset the store so no one questions why they're suddenly arriving in an empty store. Most of our guests never leave their own store. Fewer than 10% travel to more than a few stores, but you and your friends, you found the secret. By continuing to move, you eluded our notice. Oh, and that trick with the home store," he laughed, like he had said something terribly funny. "That was brilliant. No one has ever had the foresight to do that. Gale, he's been on our radar for years. Celine, too, but we couldn't find them. Do you know how infuriating that is? We own the space. We control the beyond, but that wasn't good enough for them. No, they grabbed a hammer and a chisel and carved out their own spot. Do you comprehend how difficult that is? Do you understand how complicated it is to travel through thought alone, let alone to take things with you? Oh, man, and you went outside the store." I jumped when he slammed his hands down on the table. For a moment, it felt like the whole room shook. His face was rapturous, but I could see his rage at odds with his curiosity beneath the surface. No one has ever gone to the outside and come back again. No one, not a single guest has ever done it. You're unique, a true survivor. I tip my hat to you. I was speechless at his intensity as it settled over me, unsure what to say. This close, I could see his skin pulsating and writhing, like a mask full of angry bees. He wasn't used to these kinds of emotions yet. That much was clear, and it was threatening to unmake his disguise. I suppose there weren't a lot of emotions involved when your life consisted of stomping around an endless wilderness or through the monochrome store on patrol for intruders. He seemed to be aware that he was lingering too close and turned a step back towards the door. He put a hand on his temple, his face doing that weird, jittery thing again, and he seemed to be having trouble keeping himself together. The dichotomy of this creature was truly terrifying. It was like watching a mental patient shift between personalities, and I hoped I hadn't escaped the beyond to die here to this wolf in sheep's clothing. So I suppose the question is, he asked, turning back to me, his slightly dopey smile back in place, what are you going to do with the information you have about the other place? There it was, the threat I'd been waiting for. Before you say anything, he said, reaching into his pocket and coming out with an envelope, I've been authorized to give you this. He tossed it onto the table as if it were nothing, and I was a little afraid to take it. Think of it as compensation for your time. It's more than you would have made in the 6 months you were outside. Probably more than you would have made in a year at that shitty little job, but it's our way of ensuring that you get back on your feet. We took into account that you probably got evicted from your place when the rent stopped getting paid, impound fees on your car, things like that. If you don't go wild, you could probably take a 2-year vacation on just what's in that envelope and be fine. I suppose, however, and the smile dribbled off his face with the same suddenness that it had appeared, that you might also consider it hush money. We know about your little internet story, but that cat is already out of the bag. Hell, tell them about this while you're at it. It's the internet, kid. No one believes this kind of thing. I would expect you not to try talking to anyone who might believe you, or I'll have to come back and have a very different talk with you and your friends. He looked at me as if he expected me to argue with him or try to be brave, but I was honestly terrified. I thought it would all end once we were out of the Dollar General beyond, but it sounded as if it might never truly be over. I can tell by your silence that we understand each other. I'm sure you'll never have to see me or my associates again. Have a good life. Try to forget what you saw over there. And just get back to normal. It's healthier that way. Oh, and we hope this won't affect your patronage of Dollar General in the future. He left then, but I could almost hear the smile that was spreading across his face. They cut us loose not long after that. Gail and Celine were waiting for me in the lobby, and after some paperwork and some fees changed hands, a very happy Buddy was brought out as well. I used my phone to call an Uber, and the 4 of us found a motel for the night that would accept animals. Once we were behind the door, Gail asked me if I had received a check too, and all 3 of us pulled out identical envelopes. My amount was a lot lower than Gail and Celine's, but it was still enough to live comfortably for a while. Gail and Celine had enough money to buy a house, a car, get IDs, and still retire comfortably. We're not sure what we're going to do, but tonight we're planning to get some shut-eye and figure it out tomorrow. Once again, thanks for sticking with me, and I'll have more updates soon. Until then, do yourself a favor. Stay out of the bathrooms and watch yourself around the Dollar General. You never know where one quick trip might take you.